Duality between two characters is apparent in most stories we read or watch throughout different cases in fiction. The most apparent one is through the villain and the protagonist, and I will argue that is the most fascinating one. That is why I will analyze the duality between protagonist and antagonist in one of my favorite stories of all times, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. Here we go. Dio Brando was consumed by the misfortune of his family, by the action of his father, and after his father's death he was forced to go to the Joestars. The Joestar represented to Dio the complete opposite of him, what he despises of the world, what he wants people to not be, so he destroyed their lives for them, and he became who he became, while Jonathan in the process of that also experienced misfortune, this time by the hand of his adopted brother, which is kinda even more sad. And the greatest duality between Dio and Jonathan, that is the greatest thing about Phantom Blood period, is when Dio welcomes Jonathan with respect because he knows that Jonathan has went through a parallel journey with him, because at this point they both have experienced misfortune. So the duality between Jonathan Joestar and Dio Brando might not be a perfect one between a protagonist and an antagonist, but it's a good one. A story of misfortune, a story of blame, a story of accepting misfortune and moving on with it, the story of vengeance. That is the duality of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures Part 1, Phantom Blood, and the antagonist slash the protagonist, Dio Brando and Jonathan Joestar. In Battle Tendency, the dualities are kinda split because it just doesn't work in any way to create duality between Joseph and Cars, or Joseph and the Pillar Man as a whole as the main protagonist and antagonist. Mainly because that's the weakest duality in JoJo, but what I can create a good duality of is between Joseph and Wamo. Joseph's character trait is cheating, while Wamu's character trait is honor. So they are kind of the opposite of each other, yet they are kind of relatable to each other, because deep down in Joseph somewhere is the will to survive, and that when clashes with Wamu's will of honor, and clearly Wamu was the overpowered dude in that sense in their specific fight, represented a character trait different from all we've seen in JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. So seeing Joseph win and seeing the respect that Wamu gave to Joseph represent a character trait that most characters aren't defined by or aren't specifically told by. Wamu is in direct conflict with the story because in case he can't just be good and be friends with Joseph, this is a life or death situation. So seeing this fight take place the way it did, it was amazing. Best moments of Battle Tendency are from that fight alone. Classic fight, what shonen fights should have looked like at the time. A battle of morality, philosophy, and two great fighters just taking it off with two character personalities that are arguably opposite of each other. Wamu is a great character, and I plan to talk about him and the other Pillar Man soon. That's a foreshadowing in a new video soon. In Star Wars Crusaders, Dio gets a lot of unfair criticism in my opinion. As I mentioned in my Dio is an amazing villain character analytics video, the actions that Dio takes in part 3 might be nonsense to some, or might be just rushed, or better say unexplained. That is why a lot of anime onlys prefer Dio from part 1 unless preferring Dio from part 3, which is the superior Dio. Why? That comes because of the context we get from part 6. If we take the context of what happened in part 6 and apply that logic to Dio from part 3, he is easily one of the most understanding, one of the most interesting characters in JoJo's Bizarre Adventures period. And to see that clash with Jotaro Kujo is absolutely magnificent. It's not just a classic fight, it's not just a great fight, it's not just an iconic fight. It has more than that, a psychological meaning to it. Jotaro is misunderstood for being a simple character, which is nothing wrong with being simple, but in this case it's not really true, because I honestly believe that Jotaro has a hard time of showing his emotions. He has a hard time of showing how he really feels inside him, and that is why sometimes he can be borderline boring to some, because deep inside him there is a psychologically damaged person with PTSD and more, because he has seen a lot of his friends die, especially before the Dio fight, and seeing him that the ability that killed Kakyoin, his grandfather, Joseph, Avdol, Iggy. Star Platinum the world is the ability that used to fight. Dio against also is the ability that killed all of his friends. And that is just sad. So they both experienced misfortune, Dio and Jotaro. Jotaro doesn't express that, while Dio expresses that through his personality. Even though that kinda exceeds it with his psychologically complex side in part 6, it still is a charismatic form of Dio. So when we see Dio at the last moments being like, why did I lose? It makes sense why he would say that. And it really makes for a great duality. Especially considering that Araki saw similarities between those characters, so similar that in fact they gave the same stand. And no, that's not just a coincidence. There is probably a deeper meaning to it that Araki thought about it, because it makes sense why that will happen. Anyway, can I just say that Johnny versus Diego is a way better fight? Thank you. Diamond is Unbreakable Part 4 has one of the best cases of duality between protagonist and antagonist. Usually in a story, protagonist is the leading force against the antagonist, because the antagonist wants to do something and the protagonist wants to stop that. Joseph and Cars. Or the protagonist want to do something and the antagonist will stop that. In that case is the entirety of part 5 basically. But part 4 has one of the greatest way to write duality, period, and that is that the protagonist and antagonist are competing for the same goal. This case on being free. Josuke wants Morio to be free from the killings and Kira wants to be free and have a quiet life. This is still used later into JoJo but only in part 7. So part 4 is a better way to say a perfect duality from the main universe of JoJo. And some of my favorite stories ever told have this kind of duality when the protagonist and the antagonist are competing from the same goal. This is why I consider the writing of said characters from part 4 into their story to be better than any part from the main universe. If Kira was shown in episode 4 or 5, the emotional connection with the cast would have been cut because we will have suspicion of those characters being that villain, but the fact we see Kira in the second half of the story will already build emotion with the cast. And now let me explain something about this. The fact that everything can be dealt on, but Kira is a very big deal because Kira isn't just a villain. Hear me out. Kira is the villain because of one fundamental aspect of his character that makes him what he is. With that, the only problem that the Morio warriors have to fight against is the existence of Kira as a whole, and the duality written into the cast with the trauma that they must have had and the mystery given to Kira is way stronger than most of the villains in JoJo, and that is the duality between Josuke Higashikata and Kira, which both protagonist and antagonist want to break free of the cursed fate they have and they want to be free in their life without killings in both ways. Amazing way of writing. Thank you, Rocky, love you. Okay, maybe Kira still wants to kill people, but he wants to be quiet, so chill down. Memento Oreo, the duality that the protagonist group has with the single antagonist is simpler to explain, yet it's really fascinating. Because this time the protagonist wants to achieve something and the antagonist is the person he has to go through to achieve that. The main cast of Vento Oreo have dualities between each other, so this part really didn't need a strong duality between protagonist and antagonist, so it has a simpler one in concept, yet the thematics of both individuals, Giorno and Diavolo, or both individuals and team, Giorno and the Passion group of Bruno, are thematically complex. And that is what I like about part 5 as a whole. Also, it's worth saying that Diablo got fucked in the end by Golden Experience Requiem, but I feel bad, man. In Stone Ocean, just like part 5, the duality between Jolene and Pucci, or better say, the Stone Ocean gang and Pucci, are kinda more direct. Pucci has his own philosophy that Jolene wants to stop, so kinda the other way of direction from part 5. It's interesting though, because Pucci's philosophy stands out a lot, and to see part 6 charisma of characters, mostly Jolene and Foo Fighters, also Weather Report and my boy Jotaro, clash with Pucci was amazing. Pucci mostly holds duality with Weather Report from all of them, because after all they're brothers, and Pucci holds a lot of duality with Jotaro actually, but that's for another day. But as a gang and as a protagonist slash antagonist, it's basically a one simple directed duality of I want to do something and the protagonist is gonna stop me, which kinda does. Not really. I mean, play the Neon Genesis opening. Part 7's duality is probably one of the most fascinating ones, and that is between Johnny Joestar and Diego Brando. They both want to win the race, sure for different reasons, but they both want to win the race. Johnny isn't directly gonna win the race, but he still is gonna win the race for Gyro, or better say with Gyro. Johnny has different reasons for winning the race, and that is mostly Gyro based, but they still want to win the race. So does Diego, and putting them in this situation where they both have the same goal, yet completely different morals, completely different reasons, is genius writing in a way. But through middle of the part, complications happen and Diego dies. That is why Funny Valentine is the main villain of part 7 considerably. Funny Valentine has a more direct approach to the story and more of a direct conflict, and they both want the corpses. But in this case, Johnny and Valentine aren't in duality, it's more Johnny, Gyro, Lucy Steele, and some other characters against Valentine and some other characters. But when it gets to it, Valentine is really morally complex character to a point when he kinda believes in himself more than its reality should be for selfish reasons. That kinda is a parallel journey to what Johnny did throughout of Steel Ball Run, and when they do what they do, the final moments of Valentine and Johnny are some of the best moments between protagonist and antagonist ever. But something doesn't add up. Where is Dio, one of the most fascinating characters in all of JoJo? Oh wait, here he is. When this happened, the final arc of Steel Ball Run has a lot of emotions to it. Some consider fan service, some with big brains consider more deep meaning to it, and someone with a bigger brain, narcissism aside. The final arc represents change for Johnny as a character, but also represents will for Diego as a character. Will to win, will to be the best, will to be rich, will to be the leader of everything. Something passionate about him, while Johnny is more of an outsider to that. He doesn't really care about the race anyways because he lost pretty much everything to win something simple, but he doesn't give up to the end. And I know, and by the sound of my voice, this is really emotional to me because the final chapters of Steel Ball Run are some of the most emotional mangas or emotional manga moments I have ever read in my life. Okay, let's talk about some JoJolian duality. Wait a second.